I should start by saying that I'm not an engineer. I'm a social scientist. I do admit there's some good uses for engineers as well, but I'm not one of them. I don't even have a wife who's a yoga teacher.
That's low, guys. Tell you, Mike, Rita, who's your target?
Anyway, what you're going to get from me is not even a talk by a social scientist, because I'm here wearing my hat as a commissioned official. So after this fireworks of graphs and images and all that, you're going to hear a talk which is much drier perhaps than something that you would expect from a European Union official, something dry, full of text, no pictures. So here we go. I do think, first of all, great pleasure, of course, to be here, and I am truly honored that you invited me. Thank you very much. I hope I will tell you something that will be useful for the work that you're going to do in the conferences later on. Another difference to Mark, I really need those papers because I'm not used to giving public lectures. The themes of the conference, and some of them are listed in the conference materials, they are very important to us. And they're important because they matter a great deal for the transition to a low-carbon energy system. And this is, of course, something which is very much at the top of the list of priorities for the European Commission. We have one big initiative which is called the Energy Union. Have you heard of the Energy Union? Who has heard of the Energy Union? Some of you have. And the Energy Union precisely aims at the decarbonization of the energy system. And when I say energy system, of course, I'm not referring just to the generation of energy, transmission of energy, the usage of energy, but I'm also referring to the transport system. I'm referring to heating and cooling buildings, all sorts of other things, and what Antonio put on the screen earlier on, I think confirms that you too are interested in these issues, you getting at these issues through a behavioral lens. So that's actually a very good thing. Behavioral factors are of course key to all these elements of the energy system. They determine how European consumers, and elsewhere as well of course, but we care about European consumers, how they interact with the energy system. And also how they can shape it. Now, what I always like to insist on, and this puts me slightly at odds with what my organization says, I think it's important to look at people not just as consumers, but to also look at them in terms of citizens. And that matters because it determines the way you look at their roles, you look at what potential they have, what rights they have, the way in which they interact with the energy system. And I want to look at that in a little bit more detail now. The European Commission says that's very much interested in empowering consumers. We had an event that perhaps some of you attended earlier this year in Brussels in the context of the Sustainable Energy Week that was called Power to the Consumers. Sounds very radical, especially for the European Commission. And the European Commission also put out a communication last year which is called the New Deal for Energy Consumers. Now let me unpack this for you. When the European Commission says more power to the consumers, empowering consumers, basically we're talking about three things. We're talking about giving consumers more information, giving consumers to be able to make informed choices, to exercise these choices in a more informed manner. We're also talking about giving them a more active role. And this includes things like demand response. I'm afraid we still think there's perhaps some use for demand response and smart technologies. But it also applies to things like the changing roles of consumers who also start producing energy and turns them into prosumers. The fact that some of these prosumers at least band together and they form consumer associations. So this is something explicitly welcomed by the European Commission. And thirdly, it refers to better protecting consumers. You know, if they're better informed, if they have more choices, if they're in a position to make these choices in a more informed manner. That also, in a sense, gives them more power to protect them from bad practices in the industry. But a whole new element that is coming into that is protection of consumer data. And that's because digitization has become so ubiquitous in energy and is going to become even more ubiquitous in the time to come, so that you have to put a greater emphasis on protecting the data. The data will tell you a lot about the consumers, not just the way they use energy, but also their lifestyles, what they do at given times of the day, what they like, what they don't like. And so privacy and data protection is also moving up the list. Now, whoever says a more active role for consumers talks about behavior. That's almost a given. Energy efficiency, mentioned already. That's a big theme in when you look at consumer roles. How do consumers actually use energy efficiency technologies? Why don't they sometimes use them as much as they perhaps could or should? So that's a big theme. The whole idea of these energy generating associations to consumers. Same thing. You know, you can ask, why is that? Why are these associations coming about? Is it just because people think this is a cheaper way of, or a good way of reducing their energy uses, their energy bills, or is there more to it? Does it have something to do with social issues, with maybe histories of citizen engagement in particular localities? And again, this refers back to behavior. But even more so perhaps, and sorry to belabor the point, but even more so perhaps it also refers to consumers as citizens, because the way in which people engage with these sorts of processes, in which they actually drive these processes themselves sometimes, it also means that they're playing a role as citizens. They're taking up rights, they're exercising certain powers, they make requests to the authorities, that sort of thing. So again, just giving consumers more choice is not enough. It's also not enough to better understand why they don't exercise these choices. That's a big thing in the energy efficiency debates, you know, why don't people use these technologies more? If you want to talk about social acceptance of the energy transition, or perhaps the lack thereof sometimes, when it comes to new windows somewhere or transmission lines somewhere, that's often a big issue. You cannot just go to people and say, you know, we'll improve your choices, or maybe you will better explain to you why these new installations are a good thing. You have to engage with them at a much earlier stage, and you have to engage with them in a way that resonates. And that means you have to look at the way they have engaged with energy, with the energy systems, how they have been organizing socially, etc., etc. And that's definitely a role that citizens play. Same thing if you look at social innovation. This is something that we talk about a lot, and I will admit to you, but to no one else, that we don't often really know what that means. We do know it's very important. Things like consumers and consumer associations are a form of social innovation, and they definitely have huge potential. And I'll show you, I do have some images to show you. This is what some people feel this potential is like. You know, some of you will remember the posters from the 1920s, workers' movement, that sort of thing. But we're not quite there yet in the European Commission, but it is certainly something that can change a whole lot of the energy system. Now, turning to policy challenges, I was asked to talk about policy challenges. What does this all mean for, and how is it reflected in our energy policy making? Now, I mentioned the Energy Union earlier on, and of course that's, at this point, our basic policy framework. In a nutshell, what the Energy Union is trying to do, it is trying to pull all different strands of energy policy making in the European Union, but also in its member states closer together, in the hope of making it more uniform, of coordinating better, of playing to the same song sheet, if you will, and towards similar goals. So, you know, making energy more secure, sustainable, and affordable, all these things are important, of course. We're talking about things like market design, unifying that, unifying regulatory frameworks, common measures to guarantee the supply of energy, which many member states do on their own, and of course more coordination of energy research. I want to mention the SET plan later. Who knows the SET plan? Okay, even SET plan is known. Wonderful. Excellent. So of course, citizen involvement, and this is mentioned in the Energy Union communication. Social dialogue is mentioned, social innovation is mentioned, all as enablers and facilitators for these sorts of things. Under this framework of the Energy Union, we're putting together, this is the fourth or fifth pillar, I believe, an integrated research, innovation, and competitiveness strategy. And again, of course, this is meant to boost the EU's energy research and innovation capacity to begin with. But it also is meant to help with its competitiveness. And this is something that's very much on our minds. We want to get to a place where we can say, okay, the energy research that we are supporting, that we're funding, is not just great and excellent in its own right. That is often the case in Europe. Europe is still a place that produces a lot of excellent research, has some very good research facilities and infrastructures, but it hasn't been so great at making sure that that research and innovation capacity is actually brought to market and that it is commercially successful. And then in the end result also creates jobs, creates growth. And this is of course something very much on the minds of commissioners, including our commissioner, who happens to be from Portugal. Never mind that he's from Portugal. It's a common goal to do something to jumpstart the European economy. Okay, where am I here? Now again, this strategy as well will therefore not just look at the next technology breakthrough, although we will also do that. We will look at things like energy storage, second generation of renewables. We will look at urban mobility solutions. But we'll also look at policy frameworks, at regulation. We will look at new business and service models that spring up around the energy transition. Think about urban mobility, where you have not just electric cars, you have to have research, charging infrastructure, and you have to have businesses that actually run this whole thing. And this will lead, we all think, to a whole number of changes that we don't quite know what they will consist of. So the strategy is trying to capture that into recent proposals. Good. So going down one step, you will maybe be asking, so what's that got to do with what we are doing, our behavioral research? Now, there is no window per se for behavioral research in our research support. Now I'm talking here about Horizon 2020 and actually just one slice of it, which is the societal challenges. That's not all there is to Horizon 2020, but it's the part that I'm most closely involved with. What Horizon 2020 does, it says we will not have a specific niche for social sciences. And there's one big exception, which is the challenge 6 on migration. I'm not going to talk about that either. We will actually mainstream the social sciences as well as the humanities. So we're talking about a large number of different disciplines across all the research support that we provide. Why is that done? Well, because Horizon 2020 is challenge-based. It's based around societal challenges, and the assumption is that they can only be addressed through a multidisciplinary lens, different disciplines working together. And for the social sciences in particular, you have so many different angles that it's best to mainstream those across the, not just the energy challenge, but all the challenges. And this is done not because we believe it makes sense, but also we think the impact might be greater in terms of what that really then means for societies, and again also for competitiveness and growth purposes. Now again, in the case of energy, it's pretty obvious that that makes sense, and the energy transition in particular. if you look at what we all want to achieve in moving Europe to a low-carbon economy and a low-carbon energy system, that's obviously not just a technical challenge, all due respect to engineers. And of course, we need new technology, but it's much more than that. You need to embed the technology in any number of contexts: policy contexts, regulatory contexts, societal contexts, etc. So it makes sense to embed SSH, as we like to call it, in the energy challenge. It's also important because since it is such a cross-cutting problem, it changes the relations between the relevant actors in the system. You have to, and again, this means that since it's technical, you have to look at regulatory policy frameworks, that sort of thing. And we hope that this approach will help lead to better results and make the research more relevant. This is one of my files that I look after, so anybody who wants to know more about that, they can go on and talk for hours about it, including how difficult it is to actually do this in practice. Now, having said all that, there are a number of things that don't work so well yet. And one of the issues that we are facing is that the energy research field has a lot of people that do work on SSH aspects, social science and humanities experts. But they tend to work in different groups, and these groups, or on their own, and these groups don't tend to be particularly well connected. And there is, on top of that, there is often a disconnect between the people who come to this field from a social science lens and those that come to the field from a more technical lens. And again, I can tell you more about that for unlimited periods of time when I just look inside my own institution, how difficult it sometimes is to talk to colleagues from different backgrounds and to make them see that there is actually a commonality and that they can all gain from working together, even though it is quite difficult to do. We believe, perhaps this is my own bias as a social scientist, that especially the social science and humanities specialists are sometimes left out, that there is still a bit of a bias towards technical approaches, and we hope to bring them closer into the fold, but again, not because we want to give them greater voice per se, but we want the technologists and the social scientists and the people from the humanities to work closer together. Well, what that can result in, second image, this is my last one. No way, it's not yet there. Oh, hang on, it will come. What we're doing to address these things is that we're setting up a new platform for SSH in the energy research sector. And the purpose, again, as I've just explained, it is meant to reach out to these different communities, bring them closer together, to help in addressing some remaining gaps, things that perhaps we don't have so much research on, and also help us in designing our policies, so to provide some advice to policymakers. This is a picture. So for those who have that eyesight, it says, we like to bring together people from radically different fields and way to the friction towards heat, light, and magic. Sometimes it takes a while. And we're fully aware that this is sometimes happening, including the European Commission. Apologies to those who have seen this before, because I recognize some faces in the room. Now, another angle that we're taking, this goes a bit against what I just said about mainstreaming SSH in the energy challenge. There are little windows to do dedicated SSH research. And this, the LCE31 is just simply the number of the calls. Since we have so many calls for proposals, this is a call. LCE31 is a call. And there we have split this call in two. In 2016, we have focused on energy-related choices and behavior by individuals, mainly, even though it says individually collectively. And in 2017, we're going to focus more on the surrounding frameworks, the political, institutional, governance frameworks in which these choices are exercised. So that means Both angles are represented in each year, but there is a focus in the coming year more on the governance and political institutional frameworks, whereas in the previous year, this year, the focus was more on the choices made and why the factors driving these choices per se. This is perhaps a particular one that could be interesting to you, but I would encourage all of you to use whatever channels you have to get in touch with people you know of who want to make proposals, and to start working with them early on in order to introduce behavioral and other social science, humanities related angles into their proposals. Because that's what we would like to see. We would like to see the integration from the start. We have a lot of experience with projects that want to add this once everything is said and done. And that usually is not such a good idea. I have to tell you one anecdote. I had a colleague in my office who was writing the call for an ocean energy project. And I spent quite a lot of time in Canada, so I know the Bay of Fundy. Perhaps you guys know the Bay of Fundy. It's off of Nova Scotia, the place where the tide differential is the biggest in the world. So there's lots of ocean energy being tried. And I said to my colleague, look, I mean, he said, no, we don't need social science. Go away with that, it's just too complicated. And I said to them, but look, are you going to go to the Bay of Fundy? You're going to drop that ocean energy machine into the ocean. Don't you think you want to have a look around and you want to see, okay, who are the people living on these shorelines? There may be fishermen, or maybe people in the tourism industry. Don't you think they should at least have a say, or you should talk to them about what you intend to do? Because they may have concerns. Or they may think, this is great, this will do something for the local economy. How can we interact with them? How can we supply the service? There are all sorts of angles that should come into this from the get-go, and not at the end, when you have your little machine and you want to drop it in the ocean, and then you say, oh, yeah, wait a minute, we need to talk to these people. And then, of course, those people will say, what do you mean you want to drop a machine? What is this machine? And it will create you problems. So that's not the way to do it. The way to do it is right from the beginning. All right. I think that brings me to the end of what I wanted to say. So, just to sum up, what you're going to discuss today is important to us. We really welcome these sorts of events, and we hope to learn from it. We don't expect to have any sort of ready-made recipes, that can tell us exactly what to do. And actually, we would also like to learn a little bit about the challenges that are still out there. Maybe that's just personally, I'd like to learn about some of the unresolved issues. I think without being an expert in your field at all, there seems to be still a need to actually show that behavioral approaches work, and to do more monitoring and evaluation. There's maybe also a need to say, well, okay, on the one hand, the traditional cost-benefit approaches where you send price signals, maybe they work sometimes, and maybe sometimes behavioral approaches work better. So what's the best combination of these approaches? Or should they be combined? Can they be combined? And maybe is there room for alternative approaches? Some of you may have read the work of Gerd Schönwälder, who very much attacks the nudging school and the thinking fast and thinking slow approaches, because he believes this is a form of social engineering, where you try to get people to do certain things that otherwise, if you told them what you're doing, they wouldn't want to do. So he advocates educating consumers and actually improving their capacities so that they can make these choices on their own without having to be nudged. So just throwing out a couple of things. To tell you and to show you how much I look forward to this conference, how much I look forward to sitting in on some of the sessions and learning from you about a field that I personally, despite being a scientist, know very little about. So thank you very much. Thank you also to the organizers again for inviting me, and for